Okay, let's take a look at component communication because there will be occasions where we need to pass something down to a child component or do something from the child component that affects the parent component. And if we take a look at our code and we take a look at the home component HTML, then we can say, because we've used our register component inside our home component, then we could say the home component is the parent of the register component on this occasion. And let's supposing that we had some data in our home component that we wanted to pass down to our register component. That's what we're going to go and take a look at. Now we're going to move some code from our app component because in our app component we have the function to go and get a bunch of users. So I'm just going to cut this function and I'm going to put it inside the home component for the time being. And I'll come back and fix any errors soon. And I'm also going to cut the users from here. We're not going to use that inside our app component, and also put that inside our home component. And inside our app component, I'm also going to cut the HTTP injection and also move that to our home component as well, and bring in anything that I'm missing. So we need the import for inject, we'll need the import for the HTTP client, and the errors should have gone away. And we want this to execute when our home component is created, so we're going to implement the onInit inside here as well. And then let's just create the ng onInit function and call this.getUsers. Okay, let's also go and clean up the app component. We don't need to call this function anymore. And we've probably got something we can remove from the imports at the top, and we do. Okay, so that's about as clean as this one can get right now. In fact, I don't think we're using the title there either anymore, so let's also remove that as well. Okay, so inside our home component, let's say, for example, we wanted to pass these users that we're getting inside our home component and have them available inside our register component. That's the first thing we're going to look at. And as with most things, there's an older way to do it and there's a newer way to do it. And first of all, I'll take a look at the option we had available prior to Angular 17.3. This one has literally just come out at the time of recording. So first of all, I'm going to take a look at the way that we would do this with Angular 17.2 and prior. And the way that we'd do it in Angular 17.2 and before is we would add inside the component an input property. So we'd say at useDecorator at inputs, and would import that from Angular core. And to make it clear where it's coming from, these users, I'm going to say users from home component as the name of the thing that we're going to be using here. And to save messing around with types, I'm just going to give it a type of any. This is just temporary code that we're using for this demonstration, but we'll remove before too long. So that's our input component, and we add this to the child component. The child component is receiving something, so it's an input. Then we go to our home component, HTML, and in order to pass that down to our register component, then we use square brackets, and we get the autocomplete assistance here because it recognizes that we have a property called users from home component inside our register component. So we'll use this, and we're going to set it to users. This is the property that we're going to pass down that we have available inside our home component. And we're setting the users when we go out and make our API request to go and get the users. So let's just add a quick example inside our register component to display these users. And let's say, for example, inside our form, just between the username and the password, we'll just add a div with a class of margin bottom of 3. And inside this div, we'll just add a label. And we'll take out the for, and we'll just say who is your favorite user. and we'll add a select, and we don't need the name or the ID for this short example, but we'll give it a class of form-select so we get the Bootstrap styling. And then inside here we'll loop over the options, and we'll use our built-in control flow again for this. So I'm going to say @for and then say user of and say users from home component, and I'll just use the index as the tracking, just the index of the array, so Angular can track each individual element that we're looping over. And then inside the for, specify option, and we'll give it a value, but this will be in square brackets. So I'm going to say value and say user.user name. We need to use the uppercase N here because we're still getting this from the app users that we're returning from our users controller. That will change a bit later, but for the time being, that's what we're working with. And then inside the option, we can use interpolation and say user.user name, again with the uppercase N in this case. So the system is, from our home component, we have a property called users. We want to pass that property down to a child component, and to do that we use an input decorator and input property. And then in the home component, in order to pass that down to the child component, we use square bracket syntax, and we set the property that we've called users from home component inside our register component. We set the property inside the angle brackets for the app register and set it to users. Now if we go and take a look at our browser, what we should find, if we click on register, is we've got our select option and we've got our list of users available, and these users we're getting from our input property. So that's one way to do it, and that is the way that we've always done it in Angular. But there's a new approach to doing it, and what they've provided for us now is really an extension to an Angular signal that provides us with the ability to use an input as an Angular signal. The input we're about to use is really just a small extension to the Angular signal, and it's better because if I remove the input property here, for example, well, I don't get any compiler telling me that I've got a problem and these users are not available anywhere in my application. The only time I find out that this isn't going to work is when I go to the browser and I see it not working. Because now, if I click on register, well, I do not have any users. So I don't get any compiler assistance with this approach to using an input property. So the other approach, and please bear in mind this is only available from Angular 17.3 onwards. If you're on an earlier version of that, then it will not work. And even then, with Angular 17.3, this is still considered to be in preview. So I'm going to say users from home component equals, and then I'm going to specify inputs in lowercase, and we get this from Angular Core. And just to be clear, I'm going to delete the previous version of this. And we can say is input just like this. And this is an input signal. But the advantage to this approach is we've got two things we can do here really. We can give it a type of any. Of course, we could have given our previous version a type as well. But another thing that we can do with this is we can specify that this is required. And then notice the errors that I have in my components. Now I've got compiler support, so if this is not provided, then I'm going to be shouted at by our compiler to say, hey, I need this, you've said it's required. And if we take a look at the home component first of all, then we can see we've got the nasty red underline, and it says required input must be specified. So we say, okay, fair enough, I hear you. And then we could say users from home component equals users. And if we go and take a look at what's going on in our register component, then because this is an extension to the signal, then we need to use it like we do a signal. And when we're reading from a signal, we need to use parentheses there. So that's the new way of using input properties. Inside our register component, we use an input signal. And we can specify it's required, and we can give it a type, and we're not using that decorator syntax. Does it work? Well, that's the crucial question. Let's take a look. And if I click on register, then once again, I'm back to having my users available inside this component. Great. So next we're going to take a look at the other approach, or the other way. How can I do something from the child component that affects something in the parent component? And we'll look at that next.